Today on the Word Preacher podcast, visualizing potential, being anxiously engaged, and keeping the Sabbath day holy. I'm Brett Jensen, and this is the Word Preacher podcast. All right, let's go ahead and get started. In our reading for this week, we are looking at sections 58 and 59 of the Doctrine and Covenants. Now, before we dig into this, I'd like to talk about something generally, the concept of visualizing potential. And before we do that, before we talk about what will be, I'd like to talk about visualizing the past. As a personal note, not all history is interesting to me. I've talked about a lot of history in this podcast, several aspects as we've done the New Testament and the Book of Mormon that are interesting to me, but there are things that just kind of lull me to sleep. I've never been particularly interested in Neolithic art or tools or bones that seem to excite some people. The dynasties of China seem to blend together to me. And even in United States history, which I enjoy reading about a lot more, there are some periods that are not very entertaining. I don't like studying Reconstruction. It was not an enjoyable time to read about, just tedious. And in church history as well, there are pioneer events for which others have far more passion than I do. That having been said, some history is very meaningful to me. I remember when I was young going to Washington, D.C. with my dad and my brothers, and we went and saw the Smithsonian, a lot of the sites there in D.C. And I remember looking in the Museum of American History and seeing the Star-Spangled Banner there. And that was a very memorable and impactful thing to see the actual Star-Spangled Banner. I enjoy thinking and studying about Bronze Age powers and the subsequent Iron Age empires. I think those are fascinating. Love visiting and thinking about Civil War battle sites. I visited Gettysburg and Manassas. And I enjoyed church history as well. Sites at Independence and Liberty and Nauvoo and Palmyra. And being there really cemented the significance of the history that happened there for me. It was as though in these particular locations where I went and visited these things, I was better able to visualize the great and terrible things that happened at many of these locations. Now, that tendency, that's not unique to me. Perhaps you relate to this in some way. The existence of museums and monuments and memorials throughout our country shows that a lot of people are capable of visualizing significant events in the past, even things that happened before they were born. They get a better sense of what it was and how it connects to them. Now, I believe that the same thing is possible looking at the future, but that is a lot more difficult to do. Not everyone can do it. This is a more rare ability. For example, great military leaders are the ones who can visualize the sites of their battles and strategically deploy their forces in a way that gives them an advantage, sometimes even over superior numbers. Some artists are capable of doing this, envisioning the carvings or the paintings in just plain stone or on a plain canvas before they create them. They can see kind of a direction of what it will be. Successful entrepreneurs can envision business developments and opportunities even before they become profitable. And of course, prophets frequently see the potential of both places and, usually more importantly, people. The call to go to Missouri and to build Zion was not exactly what many of these saints who were called to do this envisioned. And when they arrived, they found an undeveloped and uncivilized community on the edge of the frontier. They were on the borders of the United States. There was no Kansas at that time. And so some of these saints experienced the same difficulty of not being able to look forward and perceive the potential of what this could be. Now, with that having said, let's read a few of these verses in section 58. The Lord says, "Hearken, O ye elders of my church, and give ear to my word, and learn of me what I will concerning you, and also concerning this land unto which I have sent you. For verily I say unto you, blessed is he that keepeth my commandments, whether in life or in death, and he that is faithful in tribulation, the reward of the same is greater in the kingdom of heaven. Ye cannot behold with your natural eyes for the present time the design of your God concerning those things which shall come hereafter, and the glory which shall follow after much tribulation. For after much tribulation come the blessings. Wherefore the day cometh that ye shall be crowned with glory. The hour is not yet, but is nigh at hand. Remember this which I tell you before, that you may lay it to your heart, and receive that which is to follow. Behold, verily I say unto you, for this cause I have sent you, that you might be obedient, and that your hearts might be prepared to bear testimony of the things which are to come, and also that you might be honored in laying the foundation and in bearing record of the land upon which the Zion of God shall stand." Okay, so here we have an example where these individuals, these saints, had difficulty perceiving the future. The ability to see the potential that can come in the future and to press forward with confidence and faith is absolutely an admirable quality that shapes the perseverance of many who ultimately find success, not just in this, but in many aspects of life. There's a quote that I came across. It's attributed to John Steinbeck. It may not have actually been said by him, but it goes like this: "Socialism never took root in America because the poor see themselves not as an exploited proletariat, but as temporarily embarrassed millionaires." Whether or not he said it, I love this quote. Do you have the ability to see the opportunities that the Lord is putting around you? Do you see yourself as exploited, or as you've got some setbacks, but your destiny and your potential is much greater than where you currently are, and a will to keep moving forward? This is an admirable quality because tribulation is inevitable, but so is opportunity. Consider on what you put your focus, and refuse to view yourself as a victim. I mean, now, of course, you could say, well, some people really are victims, and that's true. But even the greatest victim of all time, our Master Jesus Christ, we don't revere him because he was a victim. We revere him because of his triumph over his victimhood, because of his power to overcome suffering. I think that we can learn from this example. All right, as we move ahead, let's talk about being anxiously engaged in a good cause. Some more reading in section 58. These are verses 26 through 29. For behold, it is not meet that I should command in all things, for he that is compelled in all things, the same is a slothful, and not a wise servant, wherefore he receiveth no reward. Verily I say, men should be anxiously engaged in a good cause, and do many things of their own free will, and bring to pass much righteousness. For the power is in them, wherein they are agents unto themselves. And inasmuch as men do good, they shall in no wise lose their reward. But he that doeth not anything until he is commanded, and receiveth a commandment with a doubtful heart, and keepeth it with slothfulness, the same is damned. Pretty strong words from the Lord about how we should be spending our time. And I think this is kind of significant to think about in general. The concept of needing to be commanded in all things is something that a lot of people like to do. Whole careers have entire vocabularies dedicated to the particulars of what they're trying to do. Many philosophers have spent considerable amounts of time trying to define exactly what morality and goodness is, for example. Some attempt to calculate what causes the most amount of happiness for the most amount of people. And others focus on trying to measure harm and protecting the largest number of individuals from the most severe harms, and that this is a better measure of morality. Or some try and incorporate multiple. Some even conclude that morality is situational or culturally relative, and that attempts to codify any kind of morals should change with the times. Contributing to policy change are those who would seek to exploit this policy for personal gain. And so certainly as we're just trying to codify things, there are problems that come in with that. In many times when we think about, in the Old West or in times gone by, contracts were less necessary than a man giving his word. That a man's word was his bond. This is kind of the romanticized version of the Old West. And of course, it's not universally true, but it is universally true that many people entered into agreements without large end-user license agreements. Contracts now are so immense that many people don't read what they're initialing on every paragraph when they do get a document, and then they sign it at the end. Yeah, okay, that's fine. It's so dense that it's inaccessible to them. The tendency to move toward more detailed code in both contracts and in law, that's a trade that's being made, an exchange. The trade is you have fewer loopholes that can be exploited, even if they're innocent misunderstandings of implication. You exchange that for less accessibility. And that means that only those with attorneys that can dedicate their efforts to navigating this code can use it beneficially. It's inaccessible to a lot of people to purchase this greater protection against loopholes. Considering that the laws and codes of various states and communities are actually quite dense, quite large, many people actually go about their business not knowing that they're in violation of some minor law, that it's illegal to have a camel in certain places, it's illegal to shave your beard on some occasions. There's all sorts of these weird laws that you see on the internet. But it is notable that this exchange, this trade, is something that God refuses to make. God does not have a published code that defines all the circumstances in which something is good or something is bad. That's not to say that God has not encouraged all publishing. He absolutely invites people to study his dealings with others, as recorded in the Holy Scriptures. And the commandments that are given there are truly beneficial, but they do not represent the immutable code that defines good and evil. Jesus Christ is the living code. This is why John the Apostle describes him as the Word of God. And we recognize him as the way, the truth, and the life. Having a living code does not provide high levels of specificity in everything that you're supposed to do or avoid doing, but it maintains accessibility. Anybody who wants to access the right way has access to the power of Jesus Christ. Human beings are meant to use the ability to access the divine, this light of Christ, to develop goodness in themselves. And this is important because prophets then are not called to define right and wrong, but to better direct us and point us to the living code. They also provide current context that can help us avoid obstacles that might keep us from the living source. This is absolutely critical to understand, that you don't have to wait for a law to do something. You don't have to wait for it to be spelled out. And in fact, the people that do say, where in the scriptures does it say that heroin is bad, they're not doing themselves any favor. That sort of thinking is not useful. Or it doesn't talk about homosexuality in the scriptures as much as it talks about love. Even if that's true, that may not be useful. The scriptures are absolutely helpful in steering us toward the truth, but God will reveal what's right and wrong through his prophets and apostles. And that is key. Are you going to God? Are you using the tools that he has to find out what he wants you to do? With the basic truths of the gospel helping us understand our purpose and divine potential, we are empowered to shift away from needing explicit definitions for everything, and instead, creatively and intuitively finding ways to go to God. This is absolutely the best way to counter enemies who creatively find ways to keep people from God. And there are innumerable individuals who try and do this. If instead you are constantly looking for ways to do what is right and do things that are applicable to what Jesus taught, well, you're doing exactly what he had in mind when he invited you, saying, ask and ye shall receive, seek and ye shall find, knock and it shall be opened unto you. All right, let's talk a little about the Sabbath. A little bit of reading in section 59. Thou shalt thank the Lord thy God in all things. Thou shalt offer a sacrifice unto the Lord thy God in righteousness, even that of a broken heart and a contrite spirit. And that thou mayest more fully keep thyself unspotted from the world, thou shalt go to the house of prayer and offer up thy sacraments upon my holy day. For verily this is a day appointed unto you to rest from your labors, and to pay thy devotions to the Most High. Nevertheless, thy vows shall be offered up in righteousness on all days and at all times. But remember that on this, the Lord's day, thou shalt offer thine oblations and thy sacraments unto the Most High, confessing thy sins unto thy brethren and before the Lord. All right. So here we have something very clear about how the Sabbath day is an observance that empowers men. Now, there's a guy that does a radio show, Dennis Prager, who did a series on the Ten Commandments, and I'm going to use paraphrase kind of the points that he made about the Sabbath day that I think are really worthwhile. He talked about how the commandment to keep the Sabbath day holy was not reserved only for the priestly or the wealthy or the elite. It was commanded that labor be avoided even by the servants, the strangers in the gates, even the animals. And that's critical because it means that people all have value beyond what they possess or are capable of producing. At this time when you are supposed to avoid all work, you still have something that you can do. And even in doing no work once a week, regardless of position, we are invited to consider all that God has given us, regardless of our station. We all can use these sacraments to covenant with Him, to receive His blessings and His forgiveness. And we also have a responsibility to be grateful. This isn't just good advice in verse 7. It's thou shalt. It's a commandment. A grateful person is kinder, more humble, more patient, and more productive. Of course, there are times when strength and defiance are required, such as defending home and family against malevolent attacks. But even in times of strife and tribulation, we can find reasons to be grateful. Dedicating a day for worship, deliberately being grateful, and genuinely offering vows and oblations helps keep us unspotted from the world. And while we're required to be disciples of Christ every day, not just on the Sabbath, there is something renewing about regularly and jointly as a community worshiping the Lord. And in doing so, this helps us to have increased strength and spirit throughout the rest of the week. In the end, it's vital that we don't assume that our worship is fine outside of church. We should take this opportunity to keep the Sabbath day holy. Don't wait for a commandment to start being good or doing good. Be anxiously engaged in a good cause. And don't let present difficulties cloud your ability to envision the greatness that lies in the future. Have faith, because Jesus is coming, and He will make everything right. We appreciate all the support for the Word Preacher podcast. Next week, we will look at preaching and dangerous tides in sections 60 through 62. Of course, there's a lot of stuff we did not cover in this week's reading. Feel free to study that individually and with your family. And of course, as always, fight on.